way, guys, we'll start now. Others will join in as we proceed. So thank you again for joining another knowledge session of the Digital Fifth. I'm very excited to talk about some of the complex topic like compliance, right? And that's where we try to make an attempt today. Before just getting into that, let me just put up my slide up. And as well the process, guys, please, wherever you have a questions, please put up a question in the Q&A sections. And we'll time to time, we'll take a pause after a certain interval and we'll invite you for any questions that if you have. So thank you again. So let's get started. I know compliance is a complex area, and especially when we start talking about the technologies related compliance, where the RBI has continued to come with a continuous flow of the various master direction which emphasize for the banks and NBFCs as well to continue to keep on working on the compliance. And if you would notice in the last couple of years, the pattern of the master directions, it's the universe of the applicability of the master direction has increased, right? So earlier, which used to be only applicable to the small commercial bank, now it gets extended to small finance bank, then it gets extended to the credit bureaus and this NBFC, the upper as well as the middle layer, and middle layer is a huge number of that. So that's where, and some of this regulation also applies to our cooperative banks. So that's where that we try to get into that some of the dimensions of the compliance management. Many of you may find it that nothing new into it. It's just a way to approach to deal with the compliance, right? So before that, I'll just quickly have an approach. I will be supported by the Deepak Sai. Let me just have my introduction. So I worked in started with L&D Infotech and where I was predominantly responsible for designing of the cyber security, the compliance framework, performing the standard implementation like ISO 27001, and also driving the technology advisory. And then I had an experience to work with the DCB Bank, where I joined in IT governance and continued to manage that responsibility, even though I started managing IT infrastructure, the data center, the digital banking, open banking. While I continue to have the responsibility of IT governance and have gone through that phase of ensuring the compliance for the various requirement, either it's coming from technologies or it's coming from the business, where the technology needs to be there to support the compliance for the business, right? And guys, I have faced multiple audits mean multiple audits, right? In 8 years of the RBI supervision, inspection and all. So with that, and then we joining the Digital Fifth. Before that, I'll request Deepak if you can just quickly do an introduction.
Sure, Shashank. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deepak. I've been a part of Digital Fifth for over 3.5 years, been working on several digital transformation projects, and in this new era where the regulations and compliance are at a new level, and the expectation of the digital products is expected to give a better control to the customers, and also with RBI coming in with several compliances, helping Shashank in implementing several compliance expectations across the banks in this digital era, and looking forward to having a great session.
Thanks. So during this session, guys, we'll try to look at that how the regulatory landscapes are changing for the financial sector and the fintech also, right? Many of you are coming from the fintech backgrounds, and also there might not be a direct relation, but since fintech work very closely with the banking and it's also pertains to the financial services delivery, then definitely you need to have an approach to ensure that the compliance aspects have been duly taken care. And also some of the challenges and efforts we'll talk about in managing the risk with respect to managing multiple compliance. And what do you mean by unified compliance framework? Because anyway, once the regulation comes, you need to approach for the ensuring the compliance by building the control framework. And also, how is importance of the having any unified compliance framework rather than the silos, and then manage your compliance better. Before that, just quick 2 minutes of intro. The Digital Fifth, we are the India's first, if you talk about that, digital financial services consulting firm, where we work with banks, NBFCs, other financial institutions, and the fintechs, helping them into their digital transformation initiatives. So like that, we provide the digital advisory services, which encompasses digital benchmarking, be it on the product or the APIs, building the digital strategy for the organizations, driving the digital transformation programs like, say, for example, digital banking platform implementations, core banking transformation, lending management implementations. We do lots of work on the open banking advisory, either driving that, building the business model around banking as a service, or, say, for example, designing the neo banking app. So that's where we help. We work with lots of the fintech and startup where that we help them to build the business models, growth models, go-to-market advisories. We do lots of work on the technology due diligence, where helping the organization to understand the readiness of the technologies for the future demands, scalability, the platform agility, the integrations layer capabilities. So that's we completely try to take a snapshot view. And also this very much related that we do lots of work on the security and the compliance for banks, and especially on the small finance bank and the NBFCs that we work very closely with them to help them to compliance, like recently be it on IT outsourcing guidelines which came, or say for example recent one on IT governance compliance, or helping them into build a framework for the cyber security reporting incident which came into somewhere in the mid of the January, right? And then we do lots of the reports development. Some of the reports you can always get an access on our website. So now let's look at that how the compliance landscape is changing. Many of us looked at it coming from the compliance background, and I can tell guys, if you are in technologies or if you are taking compliance or in the risk, I can completely sympathize with your the current states. Couple of days back, I put in a post. And I'm trying to reach out to a couple of CTOs and the CIOs for some of the small finance bank as well as the NBFCs. It's very difficult to get the time. 50% times one of the response that we are having audit, right? So that's the kind of the challenge that, and when it comes to the audit, it means that either you're going through some kind of the compliance related activities only. So look at that, how the organizations today try to manage their control environment, the risk part of it, be it on the technology risk, be it on the cyber security risk, be it on the compliance risk, be it on to their business operational risk. Like how do you try to manage it? What are the options that you have? One is definitely build a control, but you need a reference or the guidance to help you to build those controls. So first thing first most comes for the financial services, the regulatory requirements. And I'll talk about some of this as we proceed. So regulatory requirements, like in case of the RBI bringing the guidelines for the product side of it, like digital payment security controls or IT governance or the KYC guidelines, right? Then you have the standards and protocols, right? Which is typically as a good reference point for any organizations to follow, like say very simple ISO 27001 or the PCI-DSS if you have the card-based kind of the service model, right? So these are the standards which are available, widely respected, and it helps you to build a good compliance postures or the control posture within the organizations. Well, these two are readily available, referenceable documents available. We have industry best practices also, right? Industry best practices which helps you to, which has been set by industry itself. Like say for example, Microsoft, if you are using a Microsoft platform, Microsoft will have a certain best practices coming up, right? Or if you have a cloud adoption, cloud services you are using, there is a cloud capability matrix CCM framework which is available as an industry standard or best practices. How do you, when you're trying to work with this, you need to figure it out that how do I use the best of all the threes to create a spot for within my organization which takes care of the large part of the compliance for the multiple requirements, right? Look at that, just a very snapshot. It may be like 10% of all the regulations when it comes to the RBI, and the similar landscape of the regulations will vary to your the SEBI guidelines or say IRDA guidelines. SEBI is more aggressive on the regulatory guidelines, right? So you will continue to have the KYC guidelines, and it's not as a one-time guidelines. If you look at it in the last 2 to 3 years, RBI would have come to 6 to 7 amendments to keep on improving some of the controls requirement, and which required you to go back and make necessary amendments, right? For the technologies, one of the big for the banks, NBFC, small finance bank, one of the major guidelines came, which is on the master direction of IT control and risk control framework, right? For the which also takes care of the information security assurance, right? For the large bank, it may not be, or for the private bank, it may not be a much of the challenge because in 2011, RBI came with the guidelines which normally referred as the Gopal Krishnan Committee guidelines, which has been primarily a larger version of these current regulations, right? But the small finance bank and NBFCs largely with the middle layer I'm talking about, which suddenly come into that, and the organization which is just coming to the middle layer, right? Last year they may have an 800 crore and then suddenly getting into that 1100 crore and coming into the middle layer. They start finding another challenge because it's very comprehensive. If you start to get very comprehensive guidelines, it may look like a 26 pages kind of the circulars, maybe 100, 120 controls, but when you start deciphering each of the control requirement, it start getting complicated, right? Then as the organizations, banks and the financial institutions continue to adopt more of the cloud services, more of the outsourcing, that guidelines schemes of the outsourcing of technology services, digital lending guidelines scheme, which included the FLDG, which made it like how the banks and fintechs partnership is working. It started talking about that integrations layer and that how the controls need to be built into the whole of the workflows. Then something on the NBFCs, the prepaid, fraud, digital payment security control. So these are just listing to tell you that these regulations will keep on coming and its frequencies continue to increase. Yet the risk profile has continued to go up, right? So that's where these are like typically standard, and it comes with a certain time frame, and it comes with a certain guidelines and the controls listed down, which may forward from policy development to processes build up and then implementation in terms of the technology tools and all, right? While these are there as a regulatory organization, we still also want to have a standard adoptions like here on ISO 27001 or 9000 or 22301 series from the PCP perspective, right? Some of the large organizations may try to look at the NIST guidelines, which are very comprehensive standards for building any kind of a framework. Then data privacy, DPDP Acts, GDPR, these are the again standards which are available. These are typically is the Act also, right? Then PCI DSS, SOC. SOC is another becoming a major de facto standard for the at least service delivery organizations, right? Or the cloud service provider to get the SOC compliance, because it helps them to demonstrate their state of the compliance to any customer that they want to serve, right? And the COVID is also that you know that. So these are typically these are the standard. It doesn't except the data privacy in DPDP. If you look at it, none of them are mandated ones, right? Even if you look at that RBI regulations, lots of the reference will be there for that. Follow that industry best practices or industry based any framework. And how do you figure out which are the best frameworks? So these are the like ISO 27001 should be used. So when the RBI comes, and when they try to look at for the audit control framework, they'll expect you to that, okay, what are the industry framework that you're trying to use it? And that's where you will talk about that, okay, I'm using ISO 27001 certifications, right? So that's where that. I don't look at the pictures very strongly, because lots of the things are from the international market perspective also, right? Life starts getting complicated here, guys, right? So many of you may be coming from the technologies or the compliance or the product or the business teams. Just these are the simple audits that typically one go through in a year, and I'm not talking about the frequency. It could be multiple, like you will go through the regulatory audit, which may include the supervisions of annual supervision or the quarterly supervisions. And every annual audits come with a very good coverage for the technologies audit also, where that some of these compliance expectations from these standards are being looked at it, right? So regulatory audits, anyway, you go through that. ISO audit. So if you are an ISO certified organizations, and based on the kind of so ISO, if you are not aware, this is an information security management standard provided by ISO organizations. You build a control framework, typically known as in the model of plan, do, check, act, right? So, and why I'm talking about this, these are some of the mechanism comes handy when you start building up the unified compliance framework, right? So you need to plan, you need to check that what are the gaps are there, you implement the controls, and then monitor it, right? So if you are ISO certified, then you go through the surveillance audit, right? Surveillance audits are typically once in a year or twice in a year. Now you have to go through that audit also. Then the statutory audit, because annual closure, it has to be done, and ITG's general control audits are always a part of the statutory audit to give an assurance to the auditors, the financial auditors, that technologies controls are designed in such a way to not having the material impact on the financial results of the organization, right? So that's where the third party audit you have to, because vendor engagement you are doing, then risk is very high. You like to do in the third party audit where the vendors. Now in the regulatory, C-side is also becoming very common these days. C-side is a very cyber security incident, cyber security based kind of the audit, which is much deeper in the nature, which comprehensive in the nature, right? Then you will have some of the process audit, and these are typically internal audit. So every organization has the internal audit. Internal audit has their own program based on the risk-based approach. And when you talk about the risk-based approach, what do you mean by that, right? Because typically audits are designed by the internal audit on the risk-based approach. So they try to bifurcate different functions within the organization and try to understand that if that function has any control issues, what kind of impact it will have in the organization. So by that nature itself, you try to look at that information technology or information security, that functions within that sub-functions also will start falling into that your high risk category. So you will have the more frequency of the internal audit. Now just imagine that you are continuously running from one audit to another audit and then trying to address the requirement of each of the audit. And not only that, but the audit findings come, because audit happens that you are bound to have certain findings, right? Even though you are the best of the organization, you will have the certain findings, right? So now you are in the process of closure, right? So look at the loop that you will have continuously. Now the large organization, at least in my experience, they will have the good technologies landscape and put in place. They will have the good big teams to support it. Now they still face the challenges of the compliance. They still will have a kind of the struggle to make sure that the compliance requirements are met. But they're reasonably better in position to address those things. But the challenges start coming with the small finance bank organizations like the small banks which are there, or say NBFCs. And NBFCs also, I try to look at the middle layer of the NBFCs, which may not have the large teams to support that. They may also not have the tools and frameworks to support the multiple compliance. Look that I've talked about the three different dimensions. Like you'll have standard, you'll have the regulatory landscape, and you have to face on the audit. That's where the challenges start coming. That how do you start managing it into that? And what are the challenges now? Now you have seen that, right? And you could have started visualizing that yourself and understanding the challenges, especially the guys who are into the spot that I was talking about. Same of the things as you have to go through the multiple type of checks. And I'm not saying that these checks will be completely get away, right? But handling the checks or the audit points will become much easier. Like for example, change management. Now change management records, if you look at it, every audit or every compliance requirement or every standard will expect that a strong change management process within the organizations, right? Now, how do you manage the change? How do you monitor the change? How do you track the changes? That's the design of the things. Can you do it in such a way that it doesn't need to go through a kind of every time reinventions to generate those records, right? So multiple facet changes you have to consider, and these are the complex, right? Because you provide certain information and the counter information comes into that, right? To the validation. So some of the changes will be complex in the nature, right? So for example, look at the privileged access management users, like those are the system administrator. How many are the system administrator? Now you try to figure it out, do they have an active access? If they have an active access, what are the access that they have? What are the activities that they are performing? Now when you start looking in the activities, then you start looking at that, okay, these activities, like for example, he has made some configuration changes. Now you need to figure it out that, and I'm talking about not only the operating system, but I'm talking also about the application admins, right? So for example, loan management system or the loan origination system. Now, if any changes have been done, then you try to get into that, was there any change management records available for that, right? If the change management was there, then what the change have been appropriately approved. Now look at the cycle, right? You start looking from the who has the administration access. Now you have started looking at the changes which have been done in the systems or the application and their approval mechanism and the business reason for that. So that's where the complexities start coming there, and then you start getting involved with the multiple departments. Covered, not covered, but typically when any kind of the compliance build-up that you start doing that, you start figuring out that you need to involve with multiple stakeholders. You'll have to interact with compliance, you'll have to interact with the risk team, you have to interact with IT, you have to interact with the product teams, you have to interact with the finance. So multiple departments also need to coordinate and juggle between. So that's the data standard. So data standard, typically every audit requirement will have its own data formats. Like, okay, I need data in this particular order only, right? Sorry. And the security standard, like the expectation of the certain security measures required to run the multiple systems, right? So data and security standard, definitely these are time-consuming exercise, right? It's not an easy exercise. So it takes time, and not only that, audit going through the building the compliance, implementation of compliance, facing the audit and the assurance activities, and then continue to implement. It's a hefty task, right? I still can imagine. And guys, especially the technology guys, the product guys, or the guys who are in the digital, your primary responsibility is to make sure that you deliver on your product, you deliver on the new technology initiative. But with good amount of time, you will also be spending into these responding. So that's where the time consuming, right? These are the definitely periodic in nature, parallel tracks, right? You may, and the situation might come that you will have the 3 to 4 audits going, and I have faced myself 3 to 4 audits in a single time, right? So that's kind of the challenges you will have. And the last not the least, but more important, your response, your challenges whenever the now new regulation comes into place. While you are doing these things, you are already managing multiple regulations, multiple audits you are continue to go through, and suddenly one regulation comes, you are in mid of the, say for example, going through any product live or the technologies system live, then you need to, your priority changes because this comes with the timeline and it has its own reason, right? Definitely, I'm not trying to undermine it. That's where these compliance are very important, and that's where that I think most of us are able to deliver without having any kind of an impact, right? But how to manage that, that's a typically the challenging area that we've been talking about, right? So before that, I think I've gone into the understanding the challenges, but I'll take a pause here, and if, in case you have any question, guys, please raise your hand, or if you have a question answer, please share your questions in the spot. But take a pause, and we'll please maybe you can talk about your own experience also if somebody wants to talk about it. I hope I'm talking about it making sense, guys, and it's as well resonate with what you going through that. It's all coming with my experience, right? I just put it on some of the words, but it's all from experience that I'm talking about. And not only when I worked it, but today also I work with the banks and NBFCs and try to help their teams to get through this maze of the compliance challenges, right? So that's where they're. Okay, so I think I'll continue, and then maybe we come back and take questions. I mean, well, please feel free to raise any questions that you have. Yeah. So while any of these compliance structure comes or the standard comes, you need to build a compliance framework for that, right? So you go through the typical standard process of breaking down each of the requirements of the standard or regulations, try to understand the risk associated, and try to build like a control frameworks around it, and then go and implement and then monitor it, right? So typically you will have the compliance framework, and today you will have that anyway because most of the controls that regulation would have come, you would have taken certain actions already on place. Some may be at the final stage, some may be at the early stage. ISO, many of you may be already ISO certified, so you already know that how to go through that statutory audit anyway you face, so you know that how to respond to statutory audit, right? But how to make a slight tweak in the whole of the process and the approach to make the certain complexity which are there to ease out so that at least it's become much easier for you to manage. The pain of the responding to the auditors, pain of the going through that audit checks, pain of the implementation of controls is not gonna go away. But how to make the things much easier to manage, right? So that's where we're looking into that building a unified compliance framework where that you put a different requirement in a structured manner in such a way, because there are lots of overlaps between each of our standards. Even the new ones, if it comes in the future also, will have the certain overlaps with the existing control framework that you already have, right? So be it on, like say for example, talking about like say the September regulation on IT governance, right? From the RBI and ISO 27000. When I start looking into that, you will find out that almost like 70% of the ISO 27001 requirement are well covered into the IT governance, right? You still have the delta. Sorry guys. So that's where you try to build in a framework where that you bring out those commonalities which are there and try to identify what are the deviation which is outside of the boundary, right? And how do you build a level of control layer on top of it that takes care of that commonalities as well as the deviations which are there, so that these deviations are universal in nature. When you are building a control framework for those deviations, they are such a universal in nature so that it can take care of all the other ones also. It's very difficult to explain into the whole of the process, but that's why just I'm trying to simplify that. This is a control framework to bring a master checklist, right? Master control framework, where that you start mapping each of the control requirements to certain regulations, and then you try to see that how you can address the compliance requirement, right? So that's where the UCF comes, and then adding to the whole of the risk management process, because everything is linked to the risk. So be it on the ISO you talk about, be it on the IT governance, be it on the digital payment security controls, be it on the COVID, everything revolves around the risk management approach. So linking the control and the risk approach, that's where when you try to streamline and then consolidate, you get the control framework which is universal in nature. And then, so it may add an additional burden to the whole of the process, but long term definitely it's going to help you out in a big way, right? So this allows the organization to understand the compliance across. So what do you do that you have created a master inventory map with each of the applicable requirement, current as well as the future, and then you have performed the risk management activities across all the layers, across the assets, from all the standard perspective in a universal in nature. And then you try to figure it out that, okay, my compliance status with respect to ISO, you need to pull it. It's become a subset, right? So now each subset will try to individually try to respond to the respective regulatory requirements compliance, or as well as your risk standard requirement. So that's the whole of the nature of this thing is there. So typically you define an objective. What do you want to achieve? Like, are you trying to sort out only the audits and make it single audit? That's not going to happen, right? That's very clear. So the entire objective is not, but the entire objective is to build a sustainable compliance programs, right? Output should help you to build a compliance program, everything that the organization is having, right? Build the compliance controls in universal in nature, right? So that each control, when you pick it up, you don't need to worry about that. For that control, I need to do 2 things extra for this circular requirement and 3 things extra for that requirement, and that's not going to happen. So that's where the uniform compliance network, so it defines your actions that what you need to be taken. Your entire assessment process becomes simplified, right? You have in a single person, at least from your own self-assurance perspective, self-assessment perspective, it becomes much easier, right? So while the external audit will continue to happen, you may be able to demonstrate, you may be able to make it easier during that each individual audit by just picking out that entire the assessment outputs which you have already done. Like, say, for example, your IT governance audit you have done and ISO. Now, since you have done your self-assessment under the unified compliance framework, you know that what are the inputs that need to be taken out for the ISO, what are the inputs need to be taken out for the IT governance. So when tomorrow RBI audit happens, you know that, okay, what are the inputs they are going to ask for it, and what output that you need to provide in terms of your records, in terms of the configuration files, in terms of the training records. Those are the things that you need to provide an assessment procedures, right? And the single reporting. So you have a master reporting with a dashboard which will talk about that, okay, how you are faring on, let's say, for example, IT governance circular, how you are faring on the digital payment security controls, how you are faring on the ISO standards. So like, one is a single view, while as well as it helps you to build an individual compliance dashboard. So as we try to understand, and we look at that how to go about building it. So just try to visualize it, and I'm trying to simplify. It's not going to be that simple, but look at that. It's in a kind of a master checklist, master control master, single control master, where that each of the controls clearly marked out to each different standard. So moment you start picking up like ISO, you will get that ISO controls, and also the ISO control compliance and all the risk associated with those requirement of ISO 27001. While at the same time, if you try to look at the IT outsourcing, you will get the view of the IT outsourcing, that what are the things that controls that need to be taken care of it. And the same when you do the self-assurance audit, you will have the perspective of the compliance state also. So how does it help? Definitely try to reduce the compliance complexity. It doesn't eliminate. You will have to go through that. You'll have to individually also look into the vision behind or thought process behind the standard. That will always remain individually, right? You are trying to build that in only the manageability part of it into the single framework, right? So it helps you to reduce the multiple redundant efforts. Like every time when you try to any statutory audit comes, they will send you the list of the inputs. Now that you send it to the team forgets that what has been given the last time for the single audits in nature. That what are the it doesn't happen. You start afresh for all the activities, right? So chances are very high that it may help you to reduce the quite good amount of the efforts when you start looking at that records, configurations, the details, or the interaction or the inputs that you need to provide to the auditors, right? So an implementation part of it also. So that's where the efforts could be and quite good substantially be reduced. Streamline the whole of the workflows like change management. If the change management you are defining it, and if you are trying to look at from each of the expectation, the control expectation from the different standards and the regulatory requirement, you will have the better single streamlined flow. Otherwise, what will happen that you will create a different hubs to address one or two individual requirement of the processes. Because that's where only you can figure it out that okay, can I add this layer because RBI has asked for that to have let's say for example the risk indicator for that particular change. Now suddenly you add into one element into the whole of the process. It may be possible that it may have a challenge on the whole of the flow. So how do you bring that every aspect taken care and your flow is being completely streamlined, right? Documentation, it helps you to build the documentation. I think standardization of audit, so it may not standardize that audit which is being performed on you because the statutory audit will do on audits on their own way. ISO audit will happen in the way they will come for a day, they'll try to respond, ask questions and they will walk you through with the control requirement. Some of the audits can be offsite, internal audit will go through their own way, right? Depending on the nature of the auditors, the skill set of the auditor. So everything will happen. Is this streamline your response to the audits, right? How you respond to the audit, because that's typically where that IT teams or the technology security teams or the process team get hassled, right? Because these audits comes with a time pressure, right? They have their own timelines to be complete the audit within that, right? So you need to wear the pressures, and you will have already have a certain additional responsibility. That's your prime responsibility is to make any systems go live and all these things, right? So that's where the consolidation of the documentation and you also.
अच्छा रोहित, अच्छा तो आपने वो भेजा है. अच्छा ये कोई आपका फ्रेंड भी है क्या? कोई दूसरा कोई मोहित अहिरवार नहीं दिलीप अहिरवार. वाह. अच्छा तो वो अप्लाई कर रहा है कि आपको अप्लाई करना है?
Okay, there are few questions. I'll once I finish it up, then I'll try to pick up few questions.
अच्छा.
And guys, again request if you have a question, please go ahead and ask the questions, right? Definitely better you able to comply with the requirements, especially on the regulatory requirements. Your control environment gets better, and the control environments is like say for example consistent with all the others. Definitely it helps you to build the reputations and risk, right? It allows you to continuous improvement because unified compliance when it comes, you're trying to consolidate and all the things.
हाँ हम लोग सर्च तो कर रहे हैं. कोई मोबाइल ऐप डेवलपमेंट का काम है, कुछ आइडिया वगैरह बनाने का काम इस टाइप का है.
Gives you a perspective that by just
जैसे जैसे ग्रो
touching
होगा
that one element where that has the gap, I'm able to address the requirement of 4 different other elements, right? So that's definitely it's a kind of a continuous improvement in one shot for requirement being posed by the others, right? And definitely, since as you are able to manage and optimize the efforts on the other side, you have the cost efficiencies bring into the tables, right? So definitely it brings lots of the efficiency, but I think it's more of the what do you say? I won't say the complete peace of the mind, but peace of the mind in terms of the approach to the compliance, right? Peace in terms of the how do you approach to the audit, because these audits are typically comes with a kind of the hassles, right? Where that is scheduled, right? But at the same time, it is required. But at the same time, you also need to continue to focus on your goals. So how do you balance it out to address the requirement of that? So that's where the some peace in the mind in the process, right? I think we have spoken about most of the things, right? Definitely it will have a better improvement in the risk management because now your approach to look the risk is very universal in nature, right? and that's where that it will have a much better approach to the risk management, better decision making, because you know that you are addressing 3-4 compliance requirement in certain kind of the deviation comes, and the risk is not aligned much higher. How do you can respond to that, right? Better efficiency, cost efficiency. I think regulatory compliance definitely very highly chances that without much of the hassles, I will not use without much of the hassle will remain there, because control implementations in the banking and financial service is not easy, right? Because especially the technology, the way it's continuing to grow, it's becoming more and more complex. But it's improves your regulatory compliance framework, right? Scalability, adaptability, business continuity, these are the things are better. And the last is the very critical things, like it allows you to be in the position in a better response to any new regulatory requirements comes. Today, if you look at it, any new regulation comes, organization hasn't, I try to look for the consultant who can come and help them to understand the gap assessment, or immediately they will put there some of the team members to go and study that what are the requirements that we are following, what are not required, how many gaps are there, how much effort is going to take the compliance. Then suddenly the new thing, policy needs to be written, policy needs to be updated, then policy needs to be updated, then it needs to go through the complete approval process, then define new controls, define new processes, or modify the processes, go back, implement. It could be required that it may demand for certain new tools or the investment to be done. Now suddenly that your whole priority or the strategy that you were deploying has gotten a twist in the process, right? So this unified compliance framework at least gets you in a position where you are in much better position to respond, right, to the regulatory requirements. So how to build a compliance framework? I'll invite Deepak to take us through the whole of the process, but let me just pick up, I think one or two questions are there. So I think Sandeep is asking, how do you feel there is a need to not merge the compliance for payment from other structurally compliant issues? The regulatory compliance is becoming more cumbersome from a payment perspective, with the new requirement of BIS and RBI becoming much more. That's why I've been talking about it. You may not be able to stop the things which are keep coming, right? Regulatory requirement will keep on getting tighter and tighter, right? The network requirement will keep on, like, be it on the NPCI or be it on the Visa or Master, their requirement will keep on tightening. The BIS requirement, as you may not be able to stop, because the nature of the threats is continuing to grow. Nature of the challenges continue to grow, right? So these regulators or the institutions providing the standard, they are bound to make sure that their frameworks are designed to address those new other risks. As an institution, participating bodies in the whole of the regulatory framework, now we have the responsibility how to respond that. So first question, I don't think it's a merger going to happen. Definitely, it could be possible that RBI is trying to do many of the things that they try to repeal old multiple circulars and try to bring in a single circular, right? So let's say, for example, IT governance framework which came has tried to repeal 6 or 7 more standards which are there outdated and all these things. So they do that. But you will try to expect that key regulators, the industry bodies will have the single kind of framework. At least I don't see in the near future. What left is in our hand, right? How do we respond? How do we build our own framework which able to address those of the changing continuous regulatory framework? So that's where my response will be there. Be ready for that. You have that only options to respond better, right? I think Patek Datta is asking, how is the UCF different from compliance study? Audit may have a different requirement at any point of time. How will UCF help in that? So I think very important question, Pratik, and that's where I tried to respond that compliance testing is a part of the UCF, right? So when I say that you may have that one single compliance testing for all of the compliance, and that's why I'm talking about the self-assurance compliance testing perspective, be it on the IT or be it on the product side or be it on the risk side of it. You are doing your own self-assessment with respect to UCF. So that will give you the perspective of the compliance posture of each of the regulatory requirements, each of the standards in a single self-assurance, right? You will continue to have the different audits keep on taking place. I emphasize also, the statutory audit will happen, you will have the ISO audit, you will have the seaside audit. Those audits will come, they will continue to have their own requirement. While UCF may not solve everything, but at least it puts you in a posture that since your readiness to respond to multiple requirements will be much better. because you have done the self-compliance assurance with respect to a universal master control master and in depth, so it keeps you in a much better position to keep on changing different requirements at any point. So you're right. If the internal audit comes and do an access management review, or say for example, if regulatory come and ask for access management, they both may have a different requirement. But since UCF we have created a kind of an integrated control requirement at both the perspective, you have collected those records, you know that what to capture for each individual, you may be able to respond it better. So that's why I'm saying that it may help you to respond to them better. You'll continue to have a different requirement for sure, and they will observation maybe have a different, but during the observation also, when you're trying to close, don't look at from one individual perspective, but try to respond it from the universal perspective. So, so with this, I think I will request Deepak, you are there.
Yes, Shashank, I'm here.
So I'll just take the next slide. Maybe you can take another 10 to walk us through that compliance framework.
Definitely, Shashank. Thank you. I'm really sorry, guys. I'm operating out of the client location today and having some language challenges, and I have my video off. But
no,
I would like to take you through. Sure. So taking through the framework of the unified compliance. So whatever we've been discussing across, we have certain standards, several compliance requirements that we have to adhere to as an organization. And being a regulated entity as of today, now the previous definitions of if it is not in a regulation, we can do it, or if it is not a part of compliance, maybe it's a gray area we can operate. Now the stance from all the regulators is pretty evident that if it is not in the regulation, we should not be doing it. And only what if it is, only if it is mentioned in that we can do as a part of the regulation that we see, and only that needs to be done. So with that particular existence of change in understanding from overall in the industry, there is different emphasis coming from organizations looking at how they perceive the regulations, how they perceive the standards that they follow, how they look at the compliance as an overall piece, rather than looking at an intersection or the best of all is what I would like to be ready for. Now, the organizations have a requirement that they have to be universally ready and ensure whatever is required is comprehensively set at one particular location to respond to each and every audit. And there is also a prompt mechanism, this is also something that we need to follow at this particular point of compliance. And this unified compliance framework will actually serve as a guide for you to understand that this particular XYZ point is also applicable to be compliant, and we should also do it, rather than having an auditor point it out to us and then we working on it. So as a part of the unified compliance framework that we are building, is a 5-step approach that we take with each of our clients. So in the step 1, we actually do the comprehensive mapping of all the applicable regulatory compliance requirements or the standards or the master directions coming from the applicable regulator. And we also look at the best practices in the industry based on the tools that are being utilized and based on the ISO checklist or the standards that the organization is trying to comply with. So we try and build the whole comprehensive mapping of these regulations and the standards to where the organization needs to follow. And in the next step, we actually try and identify and do a gap assessment and build a risk-based prioritization matrix, and along with a detailed action plan, where rather than working in silos from each and every department, which would have been an independent audit findings, which was very peculiar to one particular department or one particular structure. In an overall UCF framework, you will know what is to be prioritized as a whole organization, where we need to work together for each and every department, where we are looking at an action plan, we are trying to reduce detailed action steps that each and every person has to work on in the particular organization, what responsibility is there for each and every department to take to. And from there on, in the next step, we have a centralized compliance management structure where
Deepak, just before you go to the next step, I'll request sincerely to every one of you to please fill up your feedback form. My team has put in the chat box of the Zoom. That link of the feedback form is there. That's always help us to keep on getting better and better, right? And keep on bringing new topics for the sessions. So So please do that, and sorry Deepak for hijacking in between because we are moving towards the end of the sessions, right? So guys, please do that. Yeah, Deepak, go ahead then for the next step.
Yeah. So the third step, we actually build a centralized compliance management control where each and every action plan that we build as a part of step 2 is something that we can track on, and we can also track at the stage of the compliance and what stage are we to meet the action plan that we have already formulated, and who's depending upon. So detailed tracking can be done, and in the real-time monitoring is something that we try and look at whatever are the compliance requirements that have been met, and if at all, just like how we do the security monitoring, we keep a compliance check on each and every new standard that is being released or the compliance requirement that is coming from the regulator. Are we still compliant to this? What do we need to do to ensure that compliance is maintained? And the fifth part is the continuous improvement and to support or to meet the regulatory change requirements. So the biggest part of the compliance is not actually completing the audits or completing the action plan that we've built, but also having each and every person in the organization be informed about the change that is coming, right? So as a part of the fifth step, we actually help the organization learn what is the exact regulation about what should they be learning and what should they be doing. So digging deeper, we'll check in each and every step what are the other things that we'll be following. Moving to the next slide. Yeah. So in the comprehensive mapping, what happens is, it always does not have to be an RBI compliant network or just a financial institution ecosystem, right? So it can always also be an insurance ecosystem, it can be a wealth ecosystem, or it can be any part of a BFSI sector where we'll try and map the applicable regulations for you. We've largely tried to classify RBI and BCI being one of the most active ones in terms of the regulatory requirements these days, and in terms of the banking regulations and others which are changing in India. So that's where we try to explicitly mention those things. What happens is our experts will map each and every regulatory or compliance requirements, also look at the industry standards as well as the compliance standards that the organization is trying to follow. And at the end of the day, whenever we try and say we are trying to meet the compliance requirement, it also has to resonate with this trust that the customer is putting in terms of the financial institution, right? So all this particular mapping of the standards as well as the compliance requirements will provide an in-depth understanding on what are the requirements the organization has to meet, and it will also help identify the gaps in terms of what the organization is following to date and what are the missing pieces that actually helps you build that largely compliant as well as the safer environment for a customer to operate in. And what we do is not just on identifying these gaps, but we will also help you prioritize these gaps in terms of the risk matrix, and we will help you prioritize what is the immediate action that you need to take in terms of the critical findings that have been developed. So in the next step, based on the risk categorization that we are trying to follow, what also we do is we'll try and identify what are the potential penalties that are involved if at all we are not trying to meet them, and based on that we will try and develop a very clear action plan with immediate actionables what are to be taken from each and every department, each and every person who's involved in a particular department, and then try and put ownership in terms of the assignments, being the timelines that we can actually meet these particular requirements versus what is in terms, let's say there is in terms any regulation releasing, there is always a timeline associated to comply with, right? So how do you meet those particular timelines as well as what are the internal actionable timelines is also we help you map it and prioritize the requirement. And from there on, we will help you efficiently manage your resources and deployment and help you work with them very closely to meet all the compliance expectations and bridge all the gaps that we have identified. Moving to the next step. Shashank, if you can please. Yeah. So we help you centralize the compliance management and build a optimum control through the UCF framework, where we help you track each and every actionable that we are trying to develop. And let's say you already have an existing GRC system. which can actually take in all the actionables from coming from the UCF and help you track it. We help you integrate these UCF controls to your GRC, or we will help you find a GRC solution that can help you actually in a centralized way track all these actionables coming in. And with that, it's not always tracking your solutions or the action plan. It is all, it comes with the collection of the data that is required to meet the compliance expectations or meet the next set of audits coming in. And all this particular, requirements being tracked in one central location where each and every department. Sorry, looks like, sorry, just got off. I will just quickly share this. Sakshi, hope my screen is visible. Yeah. So we help you optimize all the resources that are being allocated in to actually work with the compliance framework and help meet the organization. Help the organization meet all the requirements that are to be fulfilled to bridge the gaps that we are identifying. And in terms of the real-time monitoring and in terms of compliance, what happens is at the end of the day, meeting all the gaps is not, not going to completely help us be compliant to all the requirements, right? So there is a change of requirements, there is a change of standards coming in, there is a change in the way our products being operated, there is a change in the way we have changed our journey to a particular extent, or there is a new legislation like DPDPA being introduced. So we actually help you in a real-time basis monitor all those changes that are happening in the ecosystem in terms of what is available in the organization, how do you meet these changing requirements with the real-time monitoring. So it could be developing an alert-based system that could actually help you build better compliance dashboards and see potential non-compliant risks that are coming in, which this could also be a potential process. This could be an operational, operational hazard which is actually happening in the background, which is not meeting the efficiency. So it could be as simple as that, but at the same time, overall the real-time monitoring of the compliance here is to improve the efficiency of the organization, not only to meet the audit requirements, but also to operate in an optimum level. And from there on, we also help you build consolidated reports that are very tailored to each and every individual stakeholder that is involved to meet this compliance requirements from each and every department that can actually help them understand and ensure what are the next things that they would be actually having to take upon and building. And this, at the end of the day, does not get restricted to building the reports or managing the alerts, right? Having the efficient communication plan right from top down to the bottom up approach, everywhere everyone needs to be informed of what needs to be done to ensure the systems are compliant or the process is compliant or the organization is compliant. So moving to our last step in terms of our UCF that we are building, it's the continuous improvement and ensuring that we meet the regulatory change requirements. So as we were just saying, it is not always the audit or it is not always the collection of the reports that helps maintain the compliance. It is to continuously monitor these changes and get updated with the framework and ensure the organization and the people in the organization are well informed about these changing practices that are happening. So we also help you train the resources who are actually working on the, be compliance side, be different departments who would like to understand based on the industry changes that are happening. We help you train the resources on meeting the compliance requirements, why and what part of the compliance is changing, and how does it impact the organization. What are the things that you need to do to meet these particular requirements. So all those things is something that we also help train people on. And from there on, at the end of the day, we also help you with this dashboard, which actually helps you look at the compliance posture of the organization at one particular location rather than you having, you having 10 different reports to look at and trying to, at the end of the day, reduce that you are meeting maybe 95%, 99%, or 99.99% of the compliance requirements. We help you meet that particular standard which the regulators expect, or things, compliance standards expect of meeting the 100% compliance at all points of the time is our end goal with the unified compliance framework. Yeah.
Thanks, Deepak. I think almost thanks for walking us through. I think we have a few questions. We'll try to respond as much as possible. But again, a sincere request to all of you. Please give your feedback. Giving your feedback always help us to improve. That's always a motivation. And those who have not been able, those who are able to give a feedback will make sure that you receive that deck which has been there. So a few of the questions I'll try to pick it up, and if you are not able to respond to all of the questions, we'll compile all the questions and we'll try to create a response and publish on our LinkedIn post, guys. So we'll do that. I think we have next Achin. I think he's asking question: how will you ensure that UCF is all inclusive and it will not miss out any regulatory requirement as there are a plethora of them? Absolutely right, and I don't have a straight answer to that. It's going to be a tough time, but when we start looking at the product by product, and then that's where we try to put out a process that we try to bring it, go by the business function and the product wise, and try to look at the universal approach to identify. And that's where at our team and also our research team, which try to look into all the different compliance requirements, but still you may have the possibility of missing out certain of the elements because it's very very huge, right? But product-based approach and the function-based approach, if you go, you will be able to figure it out, right? You'll be able to find out. Like, for example, you start looking at that digital lending. So you will take, okay, there is a digital lending guidelines, right? Lending, you figure the digital lending guidelines, the co-lending guidelines are there. If you put up the cards, so you have the co-branded credit card regulation, you have the different other credit card regulation, you have the digital payment security control. So that's typically approach will always help you. Would you please give an example of centralized compliance management? I don't think there is as such kind of a centralized compliance management that is argument. You need to build in the whole of the process. You have to develop that framework. It's more like a framework, right? And definitely you will have the tool to help you to manage the framework. But I don't think there is as such any single centralized compliance available. I think Patrick, that's also very important question. I think Deepak was addressing some of the elements when he was talking about the risk-based prioritization, right? Is UCF a kind of the compliance risk assessment? Compliance risk assessment is anyway part of any of the compliance. What UCF through the unified compliance approach, what we are trying to put across, that you have to have the holistic risk management or the risk assessment and the management framework where that you can able to identify all the risks which primarily every respective regulation is trying to cover. Like so when digital payment is trying to cover about all the payments, the fraud related risk or the data leakage kind of the risk, while IT governance also has some of the similar kind of the risk that try to cover. So it helps you to manage that as a single holistic compliance risk assessment and risk management framework. So it's a subset, you can call it as that it's a subset of the UCF, may not be the UCF itself, right? So that's there. And you rightly said, Pradeep, that one of the objectives to perform the compliance risk assessment, right, to understand the compliance situation. So it's just a universal in nature, right? So here the multiple risk assessment that you are trying to talk about it. What we are trying to say that you may at like one single risk assessment and management framework that you build, which will address the multiple risk elements across that all the different requirements. So that's where I was talking about it. What is the minimum time frame for operating in the UCF for a startup fintech? I think for the startup fintech, we are starting from the scratch. I think it's important to build the first business model, but it's good to at least pick up the minimal baselining kind of the framework, right? You may not need to have the complete universal framework across multiple regulation, but have a baseline framework. So baseline framework, I think, which you can build into the product processes, integration layer and all these things. So it may differ from 3 to 4 months or 5 months. I don't have a distinct answer because it will depend on that what you're trying to build, what are the scope of the work and all this, but it may take 3 to 4 months or 6 months kind of time frame. But for the large organization, it may take a longer time, right? Which are already running in a business. How will UCF help us when a new guidelines amendment to an existing guidelines is introduced? Ultimately, it will notify in various particular department and track for implementation. That's, I think, one of the implementation challenge that we were talking about it, right? Because, and I have not spoken, and thanks for that bringing out this point, because some of this compliance requirement will be communicated to that particular department itself only, and they may have an awareness that some changes have been introduced, and it may not be populated to all. So So UCF will also try to bring the different stakeholders into a single framework, so that at least one entity or one stakeholder has been get to communicated about the certain amendment, and then the team can go back and look back that does the UCF able to address those amendment which has come, or if not, then how to address that amendment so that it remain within the universal compliance framework, right? So I think that's there. And also, if any new regulation comes, I already spoken about that, it's helping you in a better position to respond, right? So that's there. I think should GRC system develop as bespoke projects, or are there fairly efficient system available off the shelf? I think there are many GRC platforms available, guys. You can develop, but developing a GRC platform maybe a time-consuming exercise. You require a business and for compliance expertise, risk expertise to build that. It can be built, yes, it can be built, but there are efficient systems available in the market. I don't want to pick up a name because there are multiple. I don't should some other names are at the top of mind, but there are many, right? Guys, again, sincere request, please put up your feedback. Team has already shared the feedback form. That's always a big motivation for us, right? Thanks. So, how much time will it take to set up a unified component mid-size MFI? I think this is again mid-size MFI. I don't have an answer. It's not a single yardstick formula like a software implementation. It need to be understand that what are your expectations, what are your risk profile, what are your technology infrastructure. But it may take from the 3 to 6 months kind of time frame, right? It may more, but that's there. Is there a regulator which governs payments, any regulatory norms? I think you know that NPCI is which govern the digital payments and provide the digital payment infrastructure, and they also continue to bring time to time some guidelines, right, to for all the participants to address those regulatory requirements. So I think this is all, guys. I think we come to it, but interesting questions. Thanks for responding, asking the questions. It was very helpful for us to also get clarity in our mind. But this is a kind of an approach that we are trying to put in place, and that's why we're trying to, and that's requirement start coming from the small finance bank and the NBFCs. We always struggle to respond to this requirement. How do I simplify the whole of the process? How do I able to respond to these regulatory requirements? Because it takes away a good amount of time. And just imagine that they are on the big path where they need to invest lots on the digital initiatives, the technology transformations, right? So that's they want to figure it out how to balance out their time. And I think unified compliance framework, that's where that we talked with them, they filed that case, yes, they find a merit in the whole of the process. But happy to take your feedback. How do you see that whole of the evolution of the UCF emerging? Please share. We continue to interact on the LinkedIn. Please share your feedback. But thank you very much, guys. Thank you for being there, and always been a big motivation for you guys. Interact with you guys. Thank you. So with this note, we'll close the session. But those who are not given the feedback, please share your feedback. We'll get back to you with the deck. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Mm-hmm.